I'm going to show several examples of long division with polynomials. So let's get started. Okay, in this first one, we're going to take 2x cubed minus 11x squared plus 13x plus 15. And we're going to divide that by 2x minus 5. All right, so the first step is you take that leading term, 2x cubed, and you divide it by the leading term of your divisor. So that would give us x squared. Okay, so that's going to be the first term of my quotient, of my answer. Okay, and then you take that and multiply it by your divisor. So we would get 2x cubed minus 5x squared. And this is going to be what you subtract in your next step. So we're going to take that 2x cubed minus 5x squared, and we're going to just subtract that whole thing. And what happens there is when you subtract, you add the opposite of each of those signs. Okay, so then these would add up to 0, and I've got negative 11x squared plus 5x squared, so that would give me negative 6x squared. And then we carry down the 13x. Great, now we take our leading term, 6x squared, and divide it by the first term of our divisor. And so we would get negative 3x, and that's going to be the second term of our answer, of our quotient. Okay, we take that negative 3x and multiply it by our divisor, and we would get negative 6x squared plus 15x. And then we're going to subtract that whole thing, negative 6x squared plus 15x. Subtract that whole thing, which means add the opposite. So I change the sign on each of those terms. And what do we get? Our 6x squareds cancel out, those add up to 0, and then I've got negative 2x. So I take my negative 2x, divide that by the first term of our quotient, and get negative 1. So that's going to be the final term in our quotient, in our answer. You take that negative 1, multiply it by the 2x minus 5. So you get negative 2x plus 5. Then you subtract that whole thing. Whoops, we just need to remember to carry down that 15. Okay, we're going to subtract that whole thing, negative 2x plus 5, which means add the opposite signs. Our 2x's cancel out, and we've got a remainder of 10. So if we take 2x cubed minus 11x squared plus 13x plus 15, that's our dividend, and you divide it by 2x minus 5, that's our divisor, what you get is an answer, a quotient of 3x, or x squared, minus 3x minus 1, that's our quotient, with a remainder of 10. And usually the way we write that remainder is as a fraction. So we would take plus 10 over r. So this 10, that's the remainder. And there you have it. Moving on, let's try this one. X to the 5th minus 3x to the 4th plus, notice there's no x cubed term, so I'm going to give myself a space for that. There's no x squared term, so I also need a space for that, and then plus 12x minus 33. It just makes the process work out better. So x minus 3. Okay, first step is we take our leading term of our dividend there and divide that by the leading term of the quotient. So we're always seeing how many times does x go into that leading term, and it would be x to the 4th. And then, so that's going to be the first term in our answer, in our quotient. So then we take x to the 4th and multiply it by our dividend, or by our divisor, by our divisor, and so we would get x to the 5th minus 3x to the 4th. And we subtract that whole thing, to the 5th minus 3x to the 4th. Subtracting means adding the opposite, so we would get 0. Carry down the 0x cubed, and there's no way here. When you divide that by the leading term of the quotient, you just get 0, okay? So that's no problem. Multiplying that would just be -3. So you're just kind of getting a place here, so you subtract that whole thing, right? You still just have 0. Carry down the 0x squared, you get 0. Subtract that whole thing, bring down the 12x. Okay, and then we take our 12x, divide that by the leading term of the quotient, and you get 12. Take that 12, multiply it by the quotient, so you'd get 12x minus 36. Yep, carry down your minus 33, and we're gonna subtract that whole thing. So subtract that whole thing. That means add the opposite. So then we would have -33 plus 36 would give us a +3. These guys add up to 0. So we've got a remainder. There's our remainder. And then we can just write this a little bit more neat and tidy. You don't need all those zeros. And we've got a remainder of 3, and you just would write that as a fraction over the divisor. And there's our answer. Okay, the last one I'm going to look at is 2x cubed plus 2x squared minus 16x plus 32. And we're going to divide that by x squared minus 3x plus 4. Okay, so our first step is we take that 2x cubed, divide it by x squared, and we'd get 2x. So that's going to be our first term. Of our answer, of our quotient. And then what we need to figure out what we're going to subtract. So multiply that 2x times the divisor, x squared minus 3x plus 4, and we would get 2x cubed minus 6x, give myself a tiny bit more room here, minus 6x squared, and then plus 8x, and we're going to subtract that whole thing. So minus 2x cubed minus 6x squared plus 8x. So subtract that whole thing. That means adding the opposite, so I just change all my signs. Add that up. My 2x cubes cancel out. Those add up to 0. And then I've got 8x squared minus 24x. And then I can carry down my 32, just because this the dividend, or the divisor there has 3 terms, so I want to have 3 terms every time in each step. All right, let's figure out our next step. We're going to take that 8x squared and divide it by the leading term of our divisor there. We'd get 8. So that's the next, oops, that should be in black, that's the next term in our answer, in our quotient. Okay, now we can figure out what we subtract. We take that and multiply it times our divisor, and we would get 8x squared minus 24x plus 32, and that's, we subtract that whole thing, and you'll see that we end up with a remainder of 0. Subtracting means adding the opposite, so we change all of our signs in there, and we get a nice remainder of 0. So our final answer, our quotient there, is 2x plus 8.